My name's Larissa Ulcar. You might think I work for Mpact because I've got this lovely button on in my right pitch there, but I actually work for a consulting firm called DIALOG. I am based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. And I am joined by three fantastic panelists who I feel like the word panelist doesn't even begin to describe how I feel about them now because I've gotten to know them so well over the last year or so. So without further ado, first up, we've got Vedran Dzebic. Vedran is a cognitive neuroscientist and serves as the head of research and development at Entro. He is my fellow Canadian on the panel, based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Giving himself a little wave. Next up, we've got Katherine Dirga. Katherine is an artist and a public art specialist based out of Atlanta, Georgia. She is the director of Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, also known as MARTA, art and transit program called Artbound. And last but certainly not least, we have Fiona Lyon. Fiona is a landscape architect and I say certified arborist as well. She is based out of Portland, Oregon. She is an urban design manager with TriMet. So just to give you a bit of a roadmap of the journey we are about to take you on. Oh, sorry, I clicked a little bit ahead there. We've done the introductions now. We're going to jump into, like I said, this group exercise that Vedran's going to introduce shortly. And then we're going to be followed by the formal panelist presentations from each one of our speakers. They'll be broken up a little bit by some feedback between the panelists. So hopefully that'll keep everybody engaged. And if all goes according to plan, we should have almost 30 minutes at the end reserved for a formal questions and answer session. So without further ado, sorry, I just had to test my mic. Vedran, could you please help us introduce our cognitive sketch map exercise?
All right, thank you, Larissa. Let me grab that mic off of you. Oh, there we go. All right, now that I have the microphone, I can continue speaking. I think that worked well, right, Larissa? Okay, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So as Larissa mentioned a second ago, I'm going to lead us through an interactive activity and exercise. So I hope everybody is ready to get engaged and have some fun. So the basic idea is what we're going to do right now is we're going to do an activity that I borrowed from my academic background, which is known as a cognitive sketch map. The basic idea is that in a second, Larissa will share a link to a Miro board, which is a virtual kind of collaborative platform. And we're going to ask you to draw something, okay? And what we want you to do is we want you to draw a transit experience or a transit experience where transit connects to the place in the community and connects you to a city, right? So the basic idea is that we all know that transit allows us to connect to the social and cultural fabric of our cities and our environments to create connections to communities. So from memory, we want you to draw a map or visual representation of one of your favorite places or a memorable experience. And in that map, draw how transit allows you to experience these things, right? So is there a bus stop that drops you off near a farmer's market? Is there a subway that exits to a museum or an art gallery? Is there a public art piece that connects you to the LRT stop, so on and so forth? So the basic idea is just draw a map or an image or visual representation of how transit allows you to experience one of your favorite places or one of your favorite cities. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answers. And in a second, we'll start drawing our own maps so you can see how, I guess, the range of visual talent in our group, and there's quite a range, and you'll see that in a second. So feel free to click on the link, which will take you, I believe, Larissa, you shared the link in the chat window, right? That'll take you to the Miro board. Grab any of the open squares, put your name down if you want to put your name down. You don't have to if you don't want to. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see a panel, toolbar, excuse me. And on that toolbar, you can select a little pen icon, which will allow you to draw. So select that pen icon and you can draw your transit place, I guess, let's put it that way, okay? If you're not comfortable using Miro, feel free to grab a pen and paper and just do it the old school way. That's perfectly okay, all right? So each of us are gonna take a few minutes to draw our little transit experiences, our little transit-based environments, and then we'll discuss briefly and we'll jump into the rest of the discussion today, which is how transit allows us to experience place and create connection to place. All right. Okay, we have about 30 seconds left if you just want to finish up your drawings. All right, time's up. Well, if you just want to zoom out real quick, so we can see that there's a ton of really amazing images and drawings out there.
I am very impressed
I
by some
know.
people's Miro's ability. My goodness.
Yeah, for sure. So
Like,
thank you for taking the time.
not to put Abigail on the spot, but like, what?
Dang, Abigail. Really good looking. I really enjoyed seeing everybody's little arrows flying around. That was really cool.
Yeah, and it was great. It was great. And I hope you can all see the value in kind of using this to set the table, the basic idea being that, we don't ride or use transit for the sake of riding and using it. We use it because it connects us to our communities, right? It allows us to engage with people and our communities and, connect more deeply with our surroundings. I think we're going to summarize some of our maps to give you a little bit of background on what we drew, right? Because I think some context might be needed.
Absolutely, Vedran. And just for the record, we did do this exercise ourselves on pen and paper because we knew we were limited by the abilities of our mouse and TriMet. So here's our actual hand sketches, also varying in artistic abilities. This is mine just to quickly share on screen. If it isn't completely obvious, this is Edmonton, Alberta, clearly. And I guess questions of the audience, maybe if you want to use the reactions tool, whatever reaction you choose to use. Anyone else panic and just like love their home city so much that they drew their home city as part of this exercise? Oh, see, I'm not the only one. Okay. Anyone draw a bridge? I'm part of a structural group, so I try to draw buildings and bridges to appease them. So I'm seeing some thumbs up and heart. Perfect. But Jen?
Right. This is my map drawing. I don't even know what you would call it. As you can tell, it's not very different from what I drew on the Miro board, which I think speaks more to my artistic capabilities than Miro itself. But what I ended up drawing was this is actually, if you couldn't tell, this is a city in Croatia called Rijeka, where I got to spend about a month last summer. And that winding line you see is actually the bus route. So the apartment where we stayed was up on this kind of hill area. So the bus would wind all the way down through the center of the town where there was this bus stop, those little things in the center there with the circles attached to them are my attempts at drawing buses. And what was interesting is that the bus stop was right beside this really beautiful old church, which was this really interesting experience where you're in this really kind of shoddy bus stop, but you have this gorgeous church right beside you. And then eventually at the end of the line on the right-hand side there, you get to a bunch of stairs to take you down to a beautiful beach. So in this way, much of my experience when we were in this city was driven and as a result of using the bus system and interacting and with the surroundings through the bus network. It also happened that my grandfather was actually a bus driver in the city back in the day. So it was an interesting kind of connection to my personal history and familial history as well. So it's a really interesting moment to really drill home the fact how transit connects you to a lot of different experiences and things in your lives.
Okay, this one's mine. So I started thinking about one of my favorite towns to get around all the different ways, and Mexico City was what came to mind. And I think I more here was drawing the things that you can get to in Mexico City, like the Anthropology Museum and the Chapultepec Park and all those. But basically, you have the option for light rail, bus, subway, train, and like really nice walking paths and mobility that access that way as well. So that's my favorite thing about Mexico City is getting around it all the different ways and being able to feel like, even though it's a humongous city, that these things are all available for you without a car.
Okay, and this one is mine. We are standing at the intersection of Market Street and the Embarcadero in San Francisco, California. And yeah, we're looking at the ferry building. This is a little plaza. And when you stand in it looking at the ferry building, there's just this swirl of transit movement that you feel between bikes and pedestrians and pedicabs and historic streetcars. And you really have this like synergy that you're just being like engulfed in this movement. So I was really just trying to capture the feeling of being there in my sketch.
A lot of love for our sketches I saw through the reactions too. Great. So yeah, that was kind of like the fun kind of kickoff intro exercise to get people kind of thinking about places and the power that they have on us as humans. And now we're going to jump into the formal presentation, starting off with Vedran. I'm going to toss the controls over to you, and you
Awesome.
can guide us through.
Okay, thank you, Larissa. Okay, everybody. So I'm going to lead us off today, talking a little bit about transit placemaking strategies and how they result in an improved passenger experience, right? So what I'm going to talk today about is going to be talking about balancing two things: balancing the functional requirements of a transit network, so allowing people to understand how to use and move through a transit network and use its services, but then also introducing moments where they can connect with the transit network on a more emotional level. And with that, I'm going to talk about a couple of project examples, as well as touch on some larger kind of big picture ideas of what exactly is placemaking to set the table for the rest of the discussion today. Okay, so what is placemaking? Well, at the most basic level, placemaking is the process from which we transform transitional spaces into places, right? Places that we just move through and don't really engage with fully or deeply, into places where we want to spend time in, where we want to interact with the place itself and with one another. So that means the places are locations where we pause or we take some time to take the place in. Now, interestingly enough, when it comes to the transit experience, this notion of pause and stopping to take a place in happens quite a bit, right? So every time we stop at a bus stop to wait for our bus, or a transit terminal to wait for our transfer, or so on, there's this inherently built-in pause and wait. Now, oftentimes that pause or wait isn't necessarily a happy pause, right? You don't want to or enjoy waiting for your delayed subway or streetcar or so on. But the idea is, how can we take some of these moments of pause and create more emotionally captivating, engaging experiences to transform them from simple spaces into places? So in order to have a place, there's three things that we need to do beyond this notion of just pausing within a place. The first is that we need to create meaning, right? So places are meaningful. There's something that's bigger than the physical surroundings that we can connect with. There's additional kind of context and understanding. The second is that places are identifiable, right? So we can understand places because we can identify them. We know that when we enter a place, due to its visual design, due to the things that are in there, due to the way that the space is curated and taken care of. The third piece is that places are intuitive, right? So when we enter a place, we know how to engage with it. We know what kind of behaviors and acts it fosters and it supports, right? So we know how to engage on a personal level with a place. And the interesting part is that places that are meaningful, identifiable, and are intuitive, they create an emotional connection between us and the place, right? And this emotional connection has a lot of positive outcomes, which we can talk about later as well. Now, a quick little demo to demonstrate this relationship between meaning, identity, and emotional response. If I was to ask you what you see on the screen here, you'd probably respond, oh, I see a very poorly drawn rectangle and 5 even worse drawn circles, right? There's not really much there to engage with. But what if I tell you that it's an elephant on its back in a swimming pool, right? All of a sudden, there's probably some smirks in the audience, a little chuckle, a bit of a giggle. And what's happening here is that we're providing identity and meaning to this image, right? So by providing identity and meaning, we can create a bit of an emotional connection, right? And this is what we try to do in our work within transit design, is to create connection by providing understanding and meaning within the transit experience. So it ends up being this balance between understanding and enjoyment. So understanding in the sense of understanding how to experience and move through a transit network, and then enjoyment in the sense of making that experience as intuitive as possible and finding moments to create emotional connection. And this is what we do at Entro. So we're an experiential graphic design firm. And we like to say that we connect people to place, that we give places identity and meaning, and balance that with practical and beautiful designs and make everyday experiences inspirational. And you'll see in a second how exactly we accomplish that. Now, when it comes to, we work across sectors, but a lot of our work is within transit sectors, and we've worked in transit agencies across North America, and even some outside North America as well. When it comes to places for us, it's, again, meaning, identity, and intuitiveness. And one way to think about it within transit experiences that we want to introduce character to a transit experience. We want to provide clarity so that somebody moving through the system knows how to move through it efficiently and effectively. And we want to provide cohesion. So oftentimes, a lot of transit agencies, the individual touch points feel very disparate from one another. So we want to create a cohesive network and a cohesive system through signage and wayfinding strategies. So as an example to demonstrate this notion of providing clarity, cohesion, and character, I'm going to talk about work that we recently completed, or actually, excuse me, still working on for OC Transpo in Ottawa, Canada. So when we were first brought onto the project, the transit experiences, was it was a common transit experience. It was chaotic at times. There was lack of cohesion between services. A lot of the existing brand assets and character was, let's just say it had character, but it wasn't necessarily positive character, right? So there was inconsistency. It all looked very haphazard and so on and so forth. And the idea here was, how can we create some cohesion and introduce a positive visual character and identity to this system? We also discovered early on that there was a lot of brand assets and elements that one would experience when trying to use those as Transpo. And what I mean by that is that OC Transpo was growing, so they were developing a light rail transit system. And this had to compete, or excuse me, had to be used alongside an existing bus network. And then in addition to that, there were all these other associated services, most of which weren't even controlled or carried out by OC Transpo. But as you were moving through the system, it was difficult for you to understand how these various bits and pieces fit together, how they connected, and so on. So first thing we did is we went out and we engaged with people that actually use the transit systems. While we might be place branding and experiential graphic design and wayfinding experts, we're not experts on how people use OC Transpo. So it's important for us to engage with the community members that are actually using these services to understand what works and what doesn't, and where the strengths and weaknesses of the current system are that will inform our wayfinding master plan. So the first, what we ended up doing after that is, once we collected all the data, was to restructure and create a more cohesive hierarchy of information. Meaning that we developed a strategy where the system was identified using a system identifier. And then below that, you had two main branches, one identifying the train network and another identifying the bus network. And you'll see in a second how that ends up being implemented within the actual environment through a comprehensive and cohesive wayfinding and signage program. Here we have an image of the system identifier, which was this, let's say, playful lifesaver type image. So we took a system where every single station and stop looked very different and disparate from each other, and we gave it a cohesive element to it. So when somebody was trying to use the OC Transpo network, they could identify it easily and feel like it was part of a comprehensive and cohesive network and system. It didn't seem like a bunch of disparate pieces and elements scattered throughout the city, but instead it was an entity in itself, a cohesive piece to the wayfinding journey and experience. Beyond this, this freestanding sign, we also had a couple other design solutions which were applied to this glazed element on the station entrances. And in addition, above the entrance themselves, we identified the service pattern. So here there was a number 1 to identify the number 1 train. So this is all about creating, presenting the right information at the right time. So we're not bombarding people with information throughout their whole journey when they don't need all the information at every single point in their journey. There's also a notion kind of introducing a little bit of character and personality for stations. So while the system identifier provided a overarching brand and character to the network as a whole, there's some almost playful elements in how they were applied, right? So this large O application would vary from station to station, location to location. In addition, the lollipop sign here based on environmental conditions might not be freestanding, but instead will be protruding for the facade here. So this in turn creates a cohesive network, but station to station, there's some slight differences that introduce a little bit of character and personality to the individual stations. We were also tasked with creating places of interest maps, right? So obviously sometimes stations themselves are the main event, but more often than not, they're just going to be the access points to the surrounding communities. So it's important for us to work with our the partner organizations to identify what places of interest were and then present that in a very intuitive way as part of the overall wayfinding strategy and master plan. And then the final piece is integrating wayfinding and signage and brand identity with artistic interventions, right? So when we ended up here, we ended up working with local artists to identify locations for placemaking moments and artistic interventions. Again, ensuring that they were coordinated with the wayfinding and signage and reference back to some of the local history and the local surroundings within their individual stations and areas. Another example here, which I find quite interesting, is this their bent nails positioned on this walkway. And I bring this one up in the sense of kind of this notion of coordinating art with wayfinding and signage. If you look at this view here, you see that you can see the bent nails off in the distance. So in a way, not only do they provide an interesting artistic element, but they actually serve as a landmark, right? So you can imagine somebody walking down to this platform and you can tell them, hey, go to where the bent nails are. That's where you can catch your train. So it serves a dual function here by both clarifying your understanding of the space in the sense of how to move and wayfind through the environment, and also introducing a bit of emotional connection through the artistic elements found here. Okay, so last section I just want to talk to everybody very briefly is this general question of why does placemaking matter? So I think we all have an intuitive sense that placemaking and place branding matters because it provides clarity, and that in turn can create emotional connection. But we ask ourselves, is there a way to actually validate those assumptions, right? To measure what the impact of placemaking might be on experience. So we actually, in an effort to accomplish that, we partnered with Toronto Metropolitan University and a couple of industry partners to conduct some placemaking research, which we called a new bottom line, the value and impact of placemaking. Pretty much what we did is we created a series of environments, some environments with placemaking interventions and environment branding and place branding, another set of environments without placemaking interventions and place branding. And then we compared people's reactions to those two types of environments. So how do people experience places with placemaking, and how do they experience places without placemaking? And were there any differences between those two? So an example from one of the transit environments we use as part of the research, this is a kind of a typical condition for a transit, a subway stop. If any of you are familiar with the TTC, this will probably look very, very familiar to you. But the basic idea is here, you know, it's kind of sterile. There's not really much going on. There's no brand identity. There's no true visual character or placemaking. And in the alternate condition, we designed an environment that had placemaking within it. So it had branded elements, it had artistic flourishes, it had interesting lighting. We made effort to make it look like a place where you would want to spend time in, right? That connected it to its surroundings and to the community at large. So people experienced both these environments, both the one with placemaking and then the one without placemaking. And then we had them rate the environments in a series of measures, which in the psychological literature have been shown to be valid measures of human experience. And just some quick highlights of why placemaking actually matters. Turns out that environments with placemaking are experienced as 39% more exciting, 31% friendlier, 21% healthier, and 19% cleaner. I would imagine these are all things that we want to support within our experiences, right? We all want environments that are experienced as friendly and that experience is healthier, that experience is cleaner. These sorts of subjective individual responses to a space are in large part why we try to, or why we care about design, right? Because we have an intuitive sense that they matter. Well, this research demonstrates how much they actually matter, and it seems to be quite a significant amount. The other piece of information, or the other finding, which is I think really relevant within the transit experience, is that environments with placemaking were seen as 25% more likely to be used as part of a commute. So not only are people going to feel better in environments in transit stations with placemaking, but they're actually going to be more likely to use them. So this likelihood to actually use it will obviously, be seen itself in increased revenue and ridership and so on. Okay, thank you everybody for giving me the time. It was a pleasure to share all that information with you. Yeah, are there any questions?
So thank you, Vedran. Before we jump to Katherine, I was hoping we could maybe pause and just ask you a few questions.
Sure.
I think, one of the things that I think may be helpful for the audience is just understanding like scalability of these applications. I think a lot of transit agencies right now have pretty tight economics. And so just understanding like how to apply place branding, placemaking in a comprehensive format or versus doing it in steps and sequences. And yeah, how can you kind of like segment it?
It's a great question. And I think it's one that we're all sensitive to, right? And we want to, consider it carefully. So I think there's a couple ways to answer that. The first is that obviously you can prioritize your efforts based on data that you might have, right? So based on ridership numbers, understanding of certain station conditions, and prioritize based on where effort is actually needed, right? Based on existing data that you might have. The second piece, and kind of why I caution against that a little bit, is the fact that a lot of the problems we see when it comes to transit experience is that a lot of these kind of branded moments and signage implementation ends up being kind of piecemeal a lot of the time, where it's done in one station, then not in the other, and then it ends up feeling very, not very cohesive. So I think part of what we would propose is to develop a comprehensive wayfinding and signage master plan, and then develop a phasing strategy following that, so that you can phase it out at various speeds and approaches to control kind of cost. But at the same time, you have an overarching kind of vision and strategy that you're using, so it doesn't feel willy-nilly and so on. And I guess the last point is that in a lot of our work, we oftentimes have pilot projects to test out some of these assumptions. And the reason I mention that is that oftentimes seeing is believing. So once you implement some of these strategic recommendations and some of the design solutions, it helps build its own momentum to help you potentially get internal and external buy-in in order to roll out a full system or a full plan. So we did that actually successfully for the work we've been doing recently at SEPTA, which I didn't have time to share. But the idea is that if you can kind of strategically position some of these solutions and demonstrate their value and worth early on, then you can more easily achieve internal buy-in and implement a larger part of the program.
Terrific. And maybe I'm just going to pepper you with one more question, and then we'll move to Katherine. And there will be time, I should reassure everyone, at the very end, where we can break into conversation. I was just hoping that you could clarify. You added a new term for some of us, place branding. If you could clarify really the difference that you see between placemaking and place branding, and how we can think about that in our work.
Yeah, so I think place branding to me is it's a bit more top down. And what I mean by that is place branding is trying to communicate the brand values of a client, in this case, a transit agency or a transit service. So it's communicating to the client in the user base. While placemaking in the other sense is a bit more bottom up, meaning that it's community driven and as a result of community engagement, right? So they're both trying to communicate, and they're both trying to communicate oftentimes the same thing. So a sense of community, a sense of connectedness and so on, but they end up coming from different places and sometimes talking in different voices, if that makes sense. For us, it becomes a bit more blurred, where when we try to design, we obviously talk to people that use these services, and we want to ensure that whatever solutions we come up with are consistent with how they experience these environments in these spaces. So in that way, we try to have to inform each other. So it's not just us communicating to writers, but the writers are also informing our design solutions, so they build off of each other.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you, Fiona.
Well, hi everyone. I'll jump into the MARTA portion of this. I'm Katherine Dirga. I'm director of MARTA's Art and Transit program called Artbound.
Hey, Katherine, real quick.
Yeah.
I didn't give you the microphone.
Oh, you didn't give me the mic.
No.
Oh, here it is.
All right, there we go.
Everybody, thank you. Now I can talk. Can you hear me? All right. So thanks everybody. I wanted to talk about MARTA's art program, and based off, some of the things that Vedran was bringing up with the research and the data that's been done around place and why it's so important, MARTA's sort of bought into that, and we are looking sort of at the vision of making the stations into destinations. That would be our highest, outcome from this. But along the way, of course, also improving customer experience, improving community relationships, and kind of humanizing the scale of transit for folks. Most of the projects I've pulled to share with you today are community driven, just because I wanted to show that aspect of it, that is possible to really include the community in your efforts. And it's such a benefit because it gives you an opportunity to talk about your brand, to add that to your brand, that we are an art focused culture, people focused culture. And so that's kind of the lens that we've been coming at this from. And Larissa, it's not letting me forward. I'm sorry. I was in it and now I'm out of it. Can you give me control again? Okay. Oh, there it goes. Whoop. There we go. I'm back. Okay. So one of the programs that we really lean into is called Artbound Live, and that's our performance series, which, we've got everything from dance to theater, live music, etc. And we have a rotating roster of station musicians that come through every week. And so that's one way that we're building community. And I apologize, I'm still having a problem forwarding the slides. It's not listening to me. And then it forwards a few too many, but that's okay. There we go. Okay, maybe I'm back. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay, so because we really consider the public art that we do at MARTA to be part of our social infrastructure initiatives. And so here you see a piece that was just put on a new bus loop, this is a parking structure at a TOD that we just built near one of our stations. We also have fresh markets in 4 or 5 of the stations. So weekly we have these fresh farmers market vegetables. And then we do a program for kids we partner with Station Soccer to do a program for kids, which involves soccer fields at the station. So we're really leaning into mental, physical health, emotional health, and kind of trying to be part of that. Here you see a TOD that we recently opened near our Martin Luther King station, or King Memorial Station. The right-hand side of this building is the TOD, which is mixed, affordable, and market rate housing. And then in the station, you see the train entering. If you look directly down below the train, that tunnel is the pedestrian access to the station from the transit-oriented development. And so, just a street view of originally how it looked, it was pretty uninviting, to say the least. It goes underneath the freight track there. And then our tracks are elevated above. And so one of the, Artbound had just kind of started about 6 years ago, and the folks who were developing the TOD asked, wow, maybe the art people could help with this. And so that's a great thing to do. And I really highly encourage everybody to think, if you've got a problem or a weird place that you just don't know what to do with, ask an art person, ask someone on your staff who's with public art, or find someone outside the staff if you don't have them, to think about this, because we were able to engage a curator, and we told her, we told them it cannot be super expensive, and it can't be super maintenance heavy. It can't require a lot of maintenance. And so they were able to come up with this idea with the highway reflectors on the walls, and which is a great idea on its own. But then we were like, okay, but we have to connect this to the community. It can't just be a visual experience. And so with that, they were able to create these black diamonds that have a QR code on them. And as people go through, they can use their cell phone to scan the QR and listen to an interview with folks who live on either side of the tracks. And so people who've lived in the neighborhoods for ages talking about how it's changed, people who moved in as a kid to help their parents start a business, all kinds of different folks. And it makes it so much more connected, I think, to the community than it was as just a beautiful art piece. Now it's a a piece with lots of facets, and it's called Reflection Tunnel because it has reflectors, but also because you are able to hear and reflect back on the reflections of your neighbors in the community. Here's another, this is a mural, and this I just wanted to show how even with a mural, you can still provide some type of community engagement. So this is the East Lake station, and there are two neighborhoods. There's, again, this is along the freight track. And so there's a neighborhood on one side of the tracks, there's a neighborhood on the other side of the tracks. And until the last maybe 20 years, they were pretty segregated. So we hired an artist through our local mural curatorial agency called Living Walls. Some of y'all may have heard of them because they do a little work outside of Atlanta as well. But Living Walls were great. And again, this is another part I would recommend, is always hiring somebody who is really a specialist in this stuff, because they were able to get the word out. We got over 200 applications. They recommended that we work with somebody who was super community based already. And so we did work with this artist from Argentina who was able to host open houses, or MARTA hosted the open houses. He was able to be there and to listen to stories from the neighborhood and hear what people were interested in telling him, basically about the history of the neighborhood. And then we were able to host a community event afterwards. So when you see, and I'll go back to the original photo of the images, and the artist's name is Nico Romero, by the way. But when you see the images, these are all just a kind of a dream collage of all the things he heard and talked with people about while he was here. So, you know, just as an example, like the split apple, somebody made him an apple while he was at their house with one of those things, and he was like, "Whoa, I've never seen that before." And so the apple, but it's all kind of this, it's not literal from what he heard, but it is also in some ways is literal, some ways it's more metaphorical. So just a really beautiful way to even include people in the process of a mural. And then there's also always the option of doing things directly with the community, so letting them work on it too. We have with our station soccer an opportunity, as they were building a new field, to install a mural around the edges of the soccer fields for the kids to see. It connected to an existing mural at the station, so they had to go from the station to the parking lot where their soccer pitches are, and this allowed them to kind of connect it visually as well. So we had the artist come back, do a nice big mural design, and the kids helped to paint it. I will add that if you do plan projects like this, they're really popular. Everybody loves a family paint day. I recommend sectioning off one area for families and kids to work on, because the artist will have to go back and fix quite a bit, but it's fun for everybody. This is another one we did at a transit hub. This is kind of a quick build transit hub that we worked on, where we needed Jersey barriers to separate the patrons from the buses. And so we decided to do a nice stencil mural for these with local artist George F. Baker, and it turned out really great. I should have mentioned on the Kensington, the station soccer, that was Kevin Bongang's work. He's an artist out of Savannah and Nashville. And so so lastly, I want to talk about giving room for expression. And this is a project we did last summer with two designers from the Netherlands that we were able to meet through the Atlanta Design Festival. And so like really leaning on your partners to kind of help bring you things is great. And so Rail Talk is basically a big magnet board that, you know, with the letters and the MARTA logo colors, along with different emojis and different little images of trains and things like that, that people could use to just share a thought. And so they're really popular. And what was cool was to see the difference in different stations, what people wrote. But everybody really participated in it. It was up for 6 months. And you can see lots of room there to express. One of our big, I think, greatest ideas with this was to contact Flux Projects, another local curator, and to have them bring in local poets. That was their idea, was to add to the engagement, was to get writers and poets to participate, and then to spend about 2 hours one day by the piece and not only write their own cool stuff like what would A-Trap Brown do, but to also encourage other people to interact with it. So in that way, we were able to bring more artists into the fold. And I think it really enriched the project in a way that just having it out there was good enough, but this really added to it so much. And it also, again, just as a storytelling method, being able to video those interactions and later show those on Instagram is really important to us. And so all of this stuff is, I mean, it's content too, you know, it's social media content and it's branded content. And I think that could sound kind of callous, but honestly, it is it's so engaging and positive for everybody involved that I don't think anybody would be bothered by wanting to share the message of this. And I wanted to show also our station services folks got really involved in it too. They enjoyed not only playing with it, but also as she's cleaning it here, but making sure that it stayed graffiti free and profanity free and all those different things as well. So it was really just embraced by everyone. And that's another thing to think about, that when you do these projects that enhance the stations, that enhance the transit spaces, it's also for the employees. They're getting something out of it too. And lastly, I was just going to talk about this project called Rinse and Repeat. We had not been able to do, I think we're a little inspired by Rail Talk, to bring writers and poets into our fold of Artbound. We've done a lot of visual arts work and a lot of, you know, performing arts work. And so we wanted to see how we could bring poets, rappers, lyricists, writers into the fold. And we also wanted to, just to increase the difficulty level, we wanted to also have it relate to bus stops and bus shelters, because we have a hard time taking Artbound out to the bus ridership. The stations have weather considerations. We don't always own the land that they're on. And so with that, we decided to do this project where we used a product that you spray over a stencil. And when it dries, it's invisible. And then when it rains, the words appear. And so hence Rinse and Repeat. This was one of the wonderful poems that we were able to share. And then we had a big event at West End Station, at one of our stations, to celebrate the poets, to let them perform their pieces, and just, you know, food, drink, whatever, have a great day, and to then unveil kind of with water, I guess, a long form poem written by our lead artist. And so we did this project just like all the others. We had a call for artists, a selection panel with writers on it. And that's, you know, so we just followed that same pattern, that same process with these. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this with you too is this was an example of kind of partnering with folks and then stepping back. And so MARTA's involvement with this, probably to those who attended, felt just sort of background. We were there welcoming folks and giving away swag, but it was really run and monitored and managed by the artists. And I think that made a big difference too. They, in how comfortable everybody felt there and just the reach that they were able to get with bringing folks there. So with that, I thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Katherine. I've got a couple of quick questions for you. And
Sure.
it was really great. And you talked a bit about it during your presentation, but I hope you could elaborate a little bit on, I guess, funding and paying for these initiatives. We know they don't come free. And obviously when you're engaging artists, you want to pay the artists, right? So how do you guys manage that? What are some considerations? Well,
I mean, one thing is that MARTA is really committed to this, you know, and so there's no question that we're going to do these projects. Nobody questions, oh, why is it worthwhile to do a community event after a project? No one questions these things. And so I think there does have to be at some level an acceptance within the organization that of how much things cost. And, you know, that includes paying the artists. And I think that I'm lucky that I work in a place where people are really get that artists are skilled workers who work for a fee just like everyone else. And it's also important for us to, like you said, make sure we're paying workers properly, artists properly. So even the artists, the poets who came down for 2 hours to engage with, I mean, they were paid for their time. And so we do cover all that. We have 2 ways that we pay for everything, more or less. For the capital projects, so when we're doing the reflection tunnel, the murals, and things that are more permanent, MARTA's board did enact a 1% set aside per year, 1% of eligible capital projects. So eligible, some of y'all may already know, the FTA does not fund any portion of art with FTA funds. And so not even the design period. So, and that's something that if you see something circulating to sign, please do, because we're working on getting that changed. But for now, we only use capital funds, local funds for the capital projects. And then for the other, and so we have up to 1% of those that's guaranteed per year based on projects that we have in the hopper. And then for the rest, we just submit a budget, each year saying this is how much we're going to spend on music, this is how much, etc. And like I said, MARTA really gets that this is an important way to enhance people's experience in the stations.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. The other question I had, and again, you discussed this near the end of your presentation, was this notion of how strongly or explicitly MARTA attaches their brand to these initiatives, right? So I know, for example, in one of the murals you showed about halfway through, there was a MARTA logo on the mural.
Mm-hmm.
While the other example, you said that co-branding doesn't necessarily happen. It's not like artwork brought to you by MARTA, right? So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the I guess the need to take a step back from that kind of branded aspect and what that means to the artist and how the artwork is experienced?
Well, so the one that you mentioned, that building had a MARTA sign on the outside of it, and we do with that signage, we do ask artists to incorporate that in the artwork. I think it looks really cool, and we just need to have the signage on the outside of the building, as you know, so people know where the station is. But I would say we are more taking a step back from the direct community event, not having people feel, we want people to feel like this is a public space that they own too and they can be part of, as opposed to feeling like MARTA's doing this event and you're going to be, driven crazy with speeches and all kinds of stuff during it. So I wouldn't say we step back from the work that we are putting money towards and doing in the community, but I would say that at the event itself, we're stepping back and letting it be a fun event for the community and not having to be first and forward with, photo ops and all that kind of stuff.
That's great. Great answer. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm going to take the microphone from Katherine. I don't know what cool household products I'm at the office, so I'm going to use my mouse. And yeah, I'm going to really expand on some examples of place-based design, really spanning kind of two different parts of my career. In San Francisco, working for Public Works, and currently in Portland, Oregon for TriMet. And so, yeah, really a long time passion in public service, and the built environment led me towards a career shaping the public realm. It's taught me just really how flexible the public realm is and how highly adaptable it is. We can see this through the permutations on on Market Street, the street that I talked about earlier in my sketch, shown here, which really symbolizes kind of the evolution of changing throughout the eras. And okay, there we go. So you've probably seen this word and whatnot many times before. It's basically the name of every project we put out to the public now. It's really become pretty ubiquitous in our industry. And it's interesting because it really reminds me of something that I personally observed in San Francisco about 15 years ago, when there was just this surge of investment being infused into infrastructure corridors around the city. And communities kind of started recognizing that, they spend years helping the city plan and design and construct these investments, but that they really warranted something that wasn't so innocuous. I think a lot of the upgrades and materials that we were implementing were just pretty standard. And they, pardon me, and they really kind of picked up on this. They recognized, we really want more color. We want more authenticity. We want more vibrancy. We really want you to pick up on the distinction of our community and really reflect that in these projects. So they got pretty clever and they were pretty loud and started advocating for this personally on projects. And so this really kind of sent me on a career path, really trying to explore what is that power of place that we can embed within the public realm? How can we invest in infrastructure and invest in community? They're not mutually exclusive. And so really to create consistency and repetition and form, we often memorialize these kind of present values of our system in plans and policies and standards. And these tools are all really helpful. They're all really good frameworks. They compose our cities and the kind of core blueprint of them. But our role as urban designers and transit agency professionals and artists is really to kind of look beyond that and to kind of tap into something a little bit deeper. It's really to kind of carve out these special moments in our everyday landscape and really allow the community to start making choices and trade-offs and to really sit at that table with us. So moving kind of towards engagement, Gil Kelly was a former planning director of San Francisco, has had pretty prominent roles all throughout the West Coast. But he said something once in an interview that really sticks with me every day. He said, you can't say no to growth, but you can shape it. And really, this is where the community dialogue is just imperative to get right. And I've been incredibly fortunate. My workplaces have really been thoughtful about abandoning this kind of come to us style of engagement and have really instead tried to intersect community members like literally in their daily lives, in their routines, in the everyday spaces that they're already occupying, whether that be parks or markets or climbing gyms here or breweries, even going to schools and meeting with children. And so sacred mapping, how do we really get to know that community? It requires dedicated study, observation, interaction, really trying to map those third places and sacred spaces and bumping spaces, whatever you want to call it. We really need to kind of pop the hood and understand what's underneath, what's the kind of fine nuance of each area that we're working with. So here we have a photo. These are pretty common, both of my workplaces now, citizen-led neighborhood walks, where we let the community literally walk us around their neighborhood and point us towards, the interior of their spaces and that nuance that we need to understand. Sometimes it's having them present to us rather than us present to them. It's such a novel concept. Really trying to create that opportunity to elevate voices other than our own, particularly when we're starting up on these projects. Character studies. This is kind of another key piece of how we do this work. I think my colleagues and I, we learned that you really need to kind of understand the public realm and the patterns and that energy beyond just kind of the surface value. Really trying to catalog that nuance and the fine grained quirks of a corridor. Here we have San Francisco Pride Parade, and a huge event that happens in the city. Really trying to pick up on the sense of humor, its blemishes, its patterns. A lot of corridors have an interaction, an invitation to interact with you. So how do you kind of play on these things that already exist that the community is kind of putting out into the world? What makes a certain neighborhood tick versus another one? Because it's a really kind of sensitive social fabric, I think, that we're trying to hone in on. And we really need to make sure that we understand it so that when we do put in new infrastructure, new transit, new investments, that we're building upon this character and with this character in mind, not competing with it. And places of connection. I think so here, I think everyone's pretty familiar with this probably. On the very left, we have the first picture of Parking Day. This is a San Francisco event in 2005. Can't believe it's been that long ago. But just, how the idea that a few simple corridors and some materials and some really innovative local urban design disruptors could exploit the idea of a parking stall and use that as advocacy for public space. So really in my mind, it was that moment that kind of crystallized this idea that tactical urbanism, in the late 2000s was no longer a secret, and that anyone in the community could really have influence over their public realm. And it transformed the way we saw conventional spaces in our built environment. It begged us to really respond not just to the system, but to the ecosystem of our lives, and what these spaces mean to us. And it was really kind of a watershed moment for San Francisco and many cities and small towns too, all across the country, really trying to transform public spaces and make them accessible to all. And so here are just some photos. This was during my tenure in San Francisco. We had an annual event. It was called the Market Street Prototyping. And it was a festival. It put out a call to anyone in the community to build a temporary intervention, and then to build it and see how people interact with it. Really super interactive, fun, cheap, just an amazing event. And it, it really helped that placemaking, and it helped it make it kind of mainstream. And it leveraged a lot of places of connection. It helped people kind of form a lens on their history, different landmarks, signage, urban design. There's just so many different aspects in which you can incorporate this. And then lastly, just places of identity. Really providing a vehicle for the community to create these platforms of connection. We look to kind of the ground plane oftentimes. It's super flexible. It can provide color and language and pride. And it can also kind of help connect a corridor. I think it's something that is everywhere we look in a city. And with this, a colleague of mine always says, we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And I think about that quote as well a lot, because it's so true. I think oftentimes if you look at the photo on the left, sometimes all I can take is chalk and, an ordinary community member to go outside and kind of color their world and create that joy and happiness for other people. And so, yeah, sometimes it's just these really ordinary things that are rooted in our daily lives. And so trying to understand, picking up on that, how you can make that more permanent. Thermoplastic crosswalks in San Francisco became really popular in the last decade. They were, again, that language in the ground plane became very prominent. And so it started to trickle all over the city. Every neighborhood meeting we went to, I want thermoplastic crosswalks in our, main street. And it was an interesting kind of design exercise where we started applying them, sort of putting them throughout the city. The city traffic engineers caught on, and they realized, this actually isn't addressed within our standards, our street standards for how we design. And so that's where, as designers, we stepped in and really tried to influence, adapting that policy, adapting that legislation, really trying to help them understand the kind of canvas that it was for the community and the importance and the significance, and work with, how do we work with this in the rules? How do we keep it a safe corridor? But really try to keep creating these tools for vibrancy. But also, keep empowering the public with skills so that they too can do their own design advocacy. This can also be an amazing exercise to pull youth and younger voices in, and really engage that next generation of stakeholders. And then, lastly, places of memory. Just before I joined TriMet in 2017, there was a pretty tragic accident in Portland on our MAX system. This is at Hollywood Transit Center, and 2 brave members of our community lost their lives when they were intervening in a hate crime. And so, having also lost a peer at a transit station in Berkeley in years past, it also due to a senseless hate crime. I know how personally and how heavy these acts can be on a community. So it's trying to find a way to understand when this violence does fall into the public sphere, trying to show that there's a lot more love than this hate that happened in a community. So you can see from some of these photos, just the early outpouring of love and comments and quotes and flowers and, trying to, it's a place of grievance. It's a place of reflection. And so the agency tried to figure out, how do we evolve this into something more robust? How do we kind of help the community grieve? How do we take this to the next step? And so the year following, in 2018, this impromptu mural that you see on the screen was really created. This was our director of TriMet's art program, Michelle Traver, engaged a local artist, Sarah Farahat, and her team to really help translate those same messages from the chalk writings. This mural is called "We Choose Love," and it's to this day, a huge monument and marker in the community that is just beloved. But I think this whole conversation has raised a really interesting point in my career about public space and placemaking, and just trying to understand this kind of new place that we're at. There's no programs or blueprints or manuals on really how to respond to events like this when they happen. And we do have a role as transit agencies to really kind of step up and figure out how we can be a part of the community and help respond and help create this platform for conversation. And so, yeah, trying to understand how we, really inspire community dialogue, and try to, in our day-to-day work, really enhance this message of inclusivity. And so just one last thing on the site. We are actually, there's a mixed use TOD project that is in the works right now. It's underway to really kind of help transform the site even one step further. How do we kind of make this neighborhood, not just the site, but this neighborhood more inclusive? It's hasn't been really accessible to lower income communities and families for decades. And so the agency is looking at this as a large 12-story affordable housing project with a really community-centric design focus. And really just trying to make sure that we're, continuing that feeling of growth and safety and belonging for all. And so really, I think just to kind of tie it up, these places don't happen by accident. I think any of the images that we've seen from Vedran or Katherine or myself, they're carefully shaped with a lot of deep engagement. But we know that, placemaking is a really powerful and rich tool when it is responsive to community. So I'm going to end on this image that I love. A colleague drew this for me in San Francisco. Again, it's Market Street. I apologize for all the San Francisco imagery. But it really just kind of helps tie all of these physical things into that concept of social infrastructure, and really just reminding ourselves that it really is, it's more enduring than just the infrastructure we're putting out in the world, is to really add all those pieces of placemaking that we've talked about today. So I will stop there and take any questions.
Yeah, Fiona, quick question from me. I liked how you talked about from the very beginning this grassroots kind of demand for place, this enhancement, and I definitely think it's the grassroots swells of clamors of demands are the best way to get a lot of things done with art and with placemaking type measures. And so I love the relationship that you talked about between you as the transit professional and this community desire, and kind of helping to mold that. In one example was through helping put the policies in place that these things can happen. Could you speak to, is that something that's common that you're having to sort of help frame those policies or frame some guidelines for these types of projects?
Yeah. I think I was thinking about it this morning, just on my dog walk, that this effort, this body of work hasn't been easy. I think, there's no just like red carpet where everything's laid out, and
Right.
the scope is always captured in a project and nobody fights it. I think there's always
Right.
cuts and value engineering and resistance, and there's just never enough to make it happen. And so it really, I think if anything, it's just like, it's always, I don't want to say it's always going to be that way, but I think it's always something that we need to really defend.
Mhm.
As Vedran talked about, like capture metrics when you can, and really try to capture those community voices and try to funnel those voices towards the decision makers. And I think MARTA's got an awesome policy in place where it really does kind of crystallize the value of the agency. This is like 1% of the budget is going to go towards this stuff. Like it's there. And so we're, I think TriMet as an agency is kind of going through some growing pains. We are trying to update our policy to have a similar framework, so that the stuff is a little bit more, I want to say set in stone, but it is more supported and people don't question it as much. But it's always hard to really find the path for how to capture this. And if there are little things you can do, like the street print, for us, it was working with the traffic engineers to say, okay, what was really important about your intersection? Where are the zebra stripes going to go? If they can't go on in place of the zebra stripes, can they go between the zebra stripes? Can they go in the intersection? And so it's really just trying to take a different perspective, understand, multiple perspectives, and figure out what the kind of big picture is for everybody.
Kind of bring everybody along.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, well, I will advance us one last slide. Sorry to scare the cats away. But yeah, I guess obviously this being a virtual presentation, we can't all applaud with everybody having to be muted, but a virtual round of applause for our panelists and all the great information they shared. Oh,
there were 2 questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to definitely jump over to the attendee questions next. No, all worries. And just a reminder that we probably won't get through everybody's questions if there start more to trickle in. So as part of this last slide, everybody's contact information is here. Should anybody want to reach out, this will be available obviously as part of the recording that Mpact will host on their website. So we do have some questions in the formal Q&A, and we also have some questions I see in the chat. There's not a ton of them, which means maybe some of the internal correspondence we had between panelists answered some questions. So, alrighty, why don't we start off with, I think we'll make it more broad, but we have an anonymous attendee asking about how overcoming risk-adverse stakeholders within agencies in respect to implementing, let's say, public art or any sort of, I guess, like place branding initiative. I don't know, Katherine, if you want to take the lead on that one.
I can start, sure. So you kind of have to have a champion, honestly. I've worked at, I was at the Atlanta airport before MARTA, and the situations are a little different there as far as the airport maybe not being quite as excited about public art. They've a busy airport, busiest in the world. They got a lot to do. It's understandable. But I do think that it requires a champion at the top. And the way that you do that is if it's not already embedded, if you're not lucky enough to have that, I think that you start slow and do the low-hanging fruit, get people excited about crosswalks and things like that, and let that stuff work, and then it will eventually win people over. Not everybody, no, never everybody will never be won over by it, but people will begin to see the benefit.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think I've learned the power of piloting.
Yes, the
I had an
pilot.
old boss that just was
Just a
like,
pilot.
just call it a pilot. It's, you know,
Yeah.
we can remove it, we can tear it out, we can whatever.
Yeah,
and
just a
yeah,
pilot.
thinking about that scalability, start
Yeah.
small, build the
Mhm.
case, get the metrics, really trying to scale it up from there.
Temporary artworks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd also say, you know, at least having worked in 2 public agencies now, maintenance always drives the conversation.
Mhm.
So oftentimes it's like getting ahead of that, you know, talking to the people
Safety.
who are going to maintain it at the end of the day, get them comfortable. Same thing, sample products. If it's not something that's within their ability to maintain, figure out how you can get more resources, whether it be
Mm.
community group or, you know, whether the art program can hire a specialty kind of contract for
Mhm.
maintenance. Just getting creative with it.
Yeah, I would just say don't ever skimp on paying the artist. That's the one place you don't want to cut costs, because you'll never be able to convince people how much it actually does, you know, cost to pay an artist. They'll always say, won't they do it for $50? We had that one person that did it for $50.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I can just add really quickly about kind of bringing people on board, I think what all of us are saying is kind of engagement and bringing people along for the ride, right? So start small and start building momentum. And I think when I say engagement, I think it's twofold. One, internally bringing people along, but also externally to identify what challenges you're actually solving, so you can demonstrate the value and worth of the strategies you're coming up with to decision makers in the organization, right? Like for example, in our SEPTA research, we actually, for SEPTA, in some of the research, we used eye tracking technology. So it's like a headset that you put on and you walk through a transit terminal and it monitors where you're looking, and you can use that to identify the problems within your experience of the stations. And it was really interesting because I know some of the leadership at SEPTA did this experiment. They were blown away at what their wayfinding experience was like, right? So if you end up kind of putting them in a position where they have to face the challenges that we're trying to solve for and that people experience, then it becomes a lot more explicit and a lot more pronounced in the sense of what you're doing and why it's important.
One of the other questions I've found in the chat, I think Vedran, you spoke on a couple of maybe some new builds, but I recognize that a lot of the examples that were shared, and so did Stuart, were just that we're kind of repairing or, you know, reacting or applying techniques to a space that already exists that perhaps wasn't designed at its core to be a good place. But, you know, maybe just reflecting on some of your original design implementations and how you're like starting off new projects to make them better from the get-go. And maybe even just like a comparison between those two of how you approach like a fix versus a clean slate.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're coming in with an existing condition, the important thing to know there is that there's going to be existing experiences, right? So there's a lot of more stories and experiences that you need to capture in your design solutions, right? But even when you're starting from scratch, there still would have been a community there before your engagement, right? So a lot of time, just because it's a new building doesn't mean that there wasn't culture there beforehand, you know? So there's always needs to be a bit of a conversation between yourself and the users in order to understand what exactly you're designing for, whether it's something brand new or whether it's an updating or you know, an improvement on existing systems.
Could we jump to Keith's question? I think that's kind of an interesting one. I think Katherine mentioned that a little bit. Just
About the bus stop.
I think it's totally relevant.
Yeah.
We do these big capital projects, you know, expansions of our light rail. They get kind of built with all these different pieces and budgets for art, and the bus stops, the whole bus system is totally forgotten about in terms of the placemaking quality. So I don't have an answer, but I think it is a really good conversation. Just like, how do we steer this same train of thought?
We've had some good luck with developers wanting to build their own bus stops outside their new developments, which has been great because they then engage architects and different people to create these sort of like dream bus stops. The first shelters that were produced are getting fabricated, I think right now, and going to go in pretty soon. But they did an extensive community engagement push. I know the one that is about to open, and they worked with us a bit to do it. We also, I know Artbound sponsored a class at SCAD for the industrial design team to figure out, you know, what would be a great bus stop. And we had they broke into 3 groups and they did all this stuff. It's a fascinating question, and people come up with all kinds of stuff to put at bus stops. But at the end of the day, what people really want is a shelter, a place to sit and kind of be out of the way of like traffic and the sidewalk. So I agree with Fiona. I mean, MARTA's system is really in some ways a bus system with auxiliary trains. You know, I mean, we are really have a lot more bus coverage than we do trains. And so it's something that I'm working with, how to reach people at the bus shelters. And as far as the standards of uniformity go, Keith, they work with our bus planning group to make sure that they've got all the bases covered on that, but ours aren't maybe as strict as yours, because we have basically, I think our standard is it just has to be on a pad that's X amount, you know, bigger than the structure, and we have to own the land or have the right to the land. And so we do work with them to do that.
Well, there's some other kind of questions in the chat side too. I guess, yes, we did a lot of talk about station and implementation of place branding at stations, but and then we just talked about buses. But there's also some questions, I guess, about kind of the in-betweens of, you know, solutions to encourage pedestrians to use the proper locations to cross the tracks, or even like initiatives along the trackway that wouldn't be directly at a station proper or a bus proper, and whether or not, you know, any of your organizations have looked into this successfully or unsuccessfully.
Cool.
Well, I mean, from a wayfinding perspective, it's obviously something we consider, right? So we're not just creating a station identifier or so on. We're trying to understand that journey before somebody arrives to the station, how to get them safely to where they need to go as part of their transit experience, right? So it's a big part of what we do, right? Kind of strategically positioning information to get people safely to where they need to go, and also support an accessible experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised it didn't come up in the chat, but maybe if there's, you know, a couple minutes left, I guess anybody who's working for an organization where, you know, budget is tight, I think, for a lot of organizations right now, sort of what the pitch or what you're seeing as far as data, maybe even Vedran, about sort of how these initiatives influence ridership or revenue at the end of the day, if there's any like firm or kind of ties or relationships we're seeing out of it that you would make a plug for.
Well, I'm tempted to repeat the statistic I had in my presentation. So I guess I'll repeat it now. 25% increase in potential ridership as a result of placemaking. But in addition to that, there's also some data from other sources to demonstrate that something like brand cohesion, so having a cohesive, unified brand, can increase revenue by 10 to 20%. We also have some data from work we did with My Way, which is a transit agency in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto here, that following the development of a wayfinding master plan, that they saw ridership increase of about 6%, right? So there are a variety of sources, both from us and outside of Entro, to demonstrate that place branding and placemaking does have a direct effect on ridership and revenue. But I mean, just a quick little thing as well, right? And I kind of touched on this a little bit in my presentation, this notion that the bottom line matters a lot of the time, but sometimes the qualitative subjective experience is also what we're trying to do, right? So a lot of stuff that Fiona and Katherine that you demonstrated, it's that emotional, personal reaction to the place that really, really matters, right? And do we want to create a metric out of that, or do we need a metric out of that? Not necessarily, right? Maybe it's perfectly fine for people to have this deep emotional connection on a personal level at those locations, and that's all we're trying to do, and that's really valuable, right?
Yeah, I think it's just some shifted ways of thinking, perhaps, versus the embedded ways of, you know, how is this going to make me more money at the end of the day?
Yeah.
That would be just a perk on top of it all. I think in the chat as well, looks like we've answered. I think maybe Catherine, you responded directly, yeah, to the one answer targeted to you. Didn't see too many more coming through the Q&A. I don't think I'm missing any. A lot of people asking if it's being recorded and copies of the presentation and otherwise, which I think we've all addressed that it is being recorded and will be available on the website. I'm sure sooner than you would think. Mpact is great like that. But yeah, I mean, that brings us to the end of the hour and a half that we had today together with the, I hope everybody got some sort of takeaway and hopefully, inspire them to go and infiltrate some part of their organization.
Yes.
Either grabbing a box of chalk and tossing it on the sidewalk or really influencing or infiltrating their organization and pilot projects, you name it, and really shaping it in their own community. So we went around the globe though, from Edmonton to Toronto to Atlanta to the Pacific, and our mics changed along the way, but it was enjoyed by all. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.